Rain poured down on Orbital Station 9, hitting the makeshift shelters where refugees lived after the Galactic Wars. Among these refugees, a small figure sat under a torn cloth roof. His scaled hands carefully arranged handmade toys on an old blanket. Taiho was only 6 years old. The young Draconian had already faced more hardship than most beings face in their whole lives. His blue scales had turned dull gray from poor food and stress. His small, undeveloped wings stuck to his back, wet from the artificial rain. Toys for sale. He called in a quiet voice that could barely be heard over the rain. Only 5 credits. Most people hurried past. They pulled their coats tighter and didn't look at him. The few who did look quickly turned away. Draconians were rare in this part of the station. Most had been taken to safe planets after their home world was destroyed. Those who stayed were often viewed with fear or pity. Taiho had made each toy himself from trash he found in waste bins. He made small figures from bent metal, animals from fabric scraps, and tiny vehicles from plastic packaging. Each toy took hours of careful work with his small clawed hands. As the station's lights began to dim for night cycle, Taiho had sold only one toy, a small metal bird with wings that moved when wound up. The 5 credits would buy him enough food for one day. He began carefully packing away his unsold toys, wrapping each one in cloth scraps to keep them dry. He didn't notice someone coming until a shadow fell across his blanket. "Did you make all these yourself?" asked a deep, kind voice. Taiho looked up to see a tall human man with gentle eyes and a beard with some gray in it. The man crouched down to look at the toys more closely. He didn't seem to mind the rain soaking his station worker uniform. "Yes, sir," Taiho replied. His translator changed his natural clicks and growls into human speech. "I make them at night, when I can't sleep." The human picked up a small toy, a simple but clear figure of a Draconian warrior, with wings spread and holding a tiny spear. "This is very good work," the man said, turning the toy in his hands. "My name is Dong Yun. What's yours?" "Taiho," the young Draconian said. The crest on his head lifted slightly, showing careful interest. "Where are your parents, Taiho?" Dong Yun asked, looking around at the nearby shelters. The young Draconian's head crest flattened. "Gone, in the war." Dong Yun nodded slowly, his face growing sad. "I understand. I lost people too." He pointed to the toys. "How much for all of them?" Taiho's eyes grew wide, the straight pupils getting bigger with surprise. "All, that would be 100 credits. Without pause, Dong Yun transferred the money to Taiho's worn credit chip. "They're sold. But I have an offer for you, if you want to hear it." The young Draconian tilted his head, curious. "I work in maintenance on the upper levels. I have a home there, nothing fancy, but it's dry and warm. There's an extra room." Dong Yun stopped, thinking about his next words. No one should have to sleep in the rain, especially not someone with your talent. Taiho's claws held his credit chip tightly. He felt both hope and fear. He had stayed alive by being careful. Dong Yun seemed to understand his worry. "You don't have to decide now. I'll be here tomorrow, same time. Think about it." He stood up, putting the Draconian warrior toy in his pocket. "Keep the credits either way. You earned them." As the human walked away, Taiho watched him disappear into the crowd. He wondered if this was a trick or something. He had never dared to hope for a chance to be safe. That night, Taiho huddled in his small shelter, a space barely big enough for his small body. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped through holes in the roof. He ate a small nutrient pack, savoring each bite. With the credits from Dong Yun, he could eat for many days. But the human's offer kept playing in his mind. A dry room, a warm place to sleep. It seemed too good to be true. Taiho had been alone since the attack on the refugee ship that had killed his parents. He had learned to survive by himself, to find food, to avoid danger, and to make toys that humans would buy. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Yet there was something about Dong Yun that felt different. The human's eyes held a sadness that matched Taiho's own. And he had paid for the toys without trying to bargain, something no one had ever done before. As Taiho curled up to sleep, his claws clutched the credit chip to his chest. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one with regular meals, a safe place to sleep, and maybe even someone who cared if he lived or died. The next morning, Taiho woke early. He gathered his few belongings, his tool kit for making toys, a change of clothes, and a small data crystal with the only picture he had of his parents. He wrapped everything in a piece of cloth and tied it securely. Then he sat and waited, watching the crowd. Would Dong Yun really come back? Or was yesterday just a moment of kindness that would not be repeated? Hours passed. The station's day cycle reached its peak. The refugee sector bustled with activity as people moved about their daily business. Teo's hope began to fade. Then he saw him. Dong Yun was walking toward Teo's spot, carrying a small package. He was wearing regular clothes today, not his work uniform. Teo's heart beat faster. The human had come back. Now he had to make the biggest decision of his young life. Stay in the world he knew, dangerous but familiar, or trust this stranger who offered something he had lost, a home. As Dong Yun approached, Taiho stood up, clutching his small bundle of belongings. His future hung in the balance, dependent on the next few moments and the courage to take a chance on trust. "You came," Dong Yun said with a smile. "I wasn't sure you would." Taiho nodded, his head crest rising slightly. "I thought about what you said, and I want to see this room," the young Draconian said carefully. "If you still want to show me." Dong Yun's smile grew wider. "Of course. I brought you something." He handed Taiho the package he was carrying. "Open it." Inside was food made for Draconians and a small set of tools perfect for making toys. "How did you know what I need?" Taiho asked, touching the tools with his claws. "I asked the station's medical computer what young Draconians need," Dong Yun explained, "and I thought better tools would help you make your toys." They walked to the upper levels of the station. Taiho stayed close to Dong Yun as they moved through crowded hallways. The young Draconian had never been to the living areas before. They were cleaner, brighter, and much warmer than the refugees' own. Dong Yun's home was simple but nice. It had a small living room with a screen, a kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. Everything was neat and clean, with tools and machine parts ranged on shelves. "This would be your room," Dong Yun said, showing Taiho a small bedroom with a bed, a desk, and storage space. "It's not much, but it's perfect," Taiho said, his eyes wide. He had never had his own space before. "There are rules," Dong Yun continued. "You'll need to go to school on the station, and I expect you to help with chores. But your free time is yours, and you can keep making your toys if you want." Taiho nodded seriously. "I understand. I can work hard." "I know you can," Dong Yun said. "I've already registered you as my ward with the station. It's temporary guardianship for now, but it gives you legal status and access to services." The young Draconian looked up at the human, confused. "Why are you helping me? Why me?" Dong Yun was quiet for a moment, looking far away. "I had a son once, Doyun. He would have been about your age now." He took a deep breath. "The war took him and his mother. I couldn't help them, but maybe I can help you." Taiho didn't know what to say. In Draconian culture, taking in orphans was considered a sacred duty, but he had never expected to find such a tradition among humans. "You can stay as long as you want." Dong Yun continued. "No pressure. If you decide this isn't working, you can leave. But I hope you'll give it a chance." The young Draconian looked around the room again, then back at Dong Yun. Slowly, he held out his hand in the human way of agreement he had seen in the markets. "I will stay," Taiho said, his translator working hard to convey the formal tone of the Draconian promise. "And I will respect your home as my own." Dong Yun shook the small scaled hand gently. "Welcome home, Taiho." The first few days were strange for both of them. Taiho wasn't used to regular meals, a soft bed, or hot water. He would hoard food under his bed, a habit from his time on the streets. He would wake up confused, not knowing where he was. And he was always watching Dong Yun, waiting for the human to change his mind. Dong Yun was patient. He showed Taiho how to use the shower, how to operate the food unit, and how to call him if there was an emergency. He gave the young Draconian space, but made sure he knew he wasn't alone anymore. A week after Taiho moved in, Dong Yun took him to register for school. The education center was large and full of children from many species. Taiho had never been around so many young beings before, Will they like me? Taiho asked, his tail twitching with worry. I'm different. Many children here are different, Dong Yun said. That's what makes the station special. And if anyone is unkind, you tell me or your teacher. School was hard at first. Taiho knew how to read and do basic math his parents had taught him before they died. But he had missed a lot of formal education. The other children were curious about him, some friendly, others wary. But Taiho was smart and eager to learn. His teachers were impressed by his quick mind and careful work. And his skill at making toys soon earned him friends who wanted to see what he could create. At home, Taiho and Dong Yun fell into a routine. Dong Yun worked long shifts maintaining the station's systems, but he always made time to help Taiho with homework and to share meals. In the evenings, they would sit in the living room, Dong Yun reading reports while Taiho worked on his toys. One night, about a month after Taiho had come to live with him, Dong Yun found the young Draconian sitting on his bed, looking at the data crystal with his parents' picture. Do you miss them? Dong Yun asked, sitting beside him. Taiho nodded, his crest flat against his head in sadness. Every day, my mother used to sing to me in our language. My father taught me how to make toys. He looked up at Dong Yun. Do you miss your son? Every day, Dong Yun echoed. And his mother. But having you here helps. Not because you replace them, no one could, but because having someone to care for gives me purpose again. Taiho was quiet for a moment. Then he held out the data crystal. Would you like to see them? My parents? Dong Yun understood the honor being offered. I would. The image showed two adult Draconians. Their scales of vibrant blue like Taiho's had once been. Between them stood a smaller figure, Taiho, his crest high and proud, his wings just beginning to develop. They were scholars, Taiho explained. They studied old technologies. That's why we were on the refugee ship. They were going to work at a university on Earth. They would be very proud of you, Dong Yun said. You've survived so much, and you're still kind and creative. That night, for the first time since coming to live with Dong Yun, Taiho didn't hide food under his bed. It was a small step, but an important one. He was beginning to believe that tomorrow would bring another meal, that this home might last. And Dong Yun, watching the young Draconian finally sleep peacefully through the night, felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope for the future, and the warm certainty that he was no longer alone. 3 months passed. Taiho and Dong Yun had settled into a good routine. Taiho went to school during the day, where he did very well in science and art, but struggled with human history. In the evenings, he helped Dong Yun cook meals and clean their home before going to his room to make toys. The young Draconian was changing. His scales had become bright blue again, and his wings were growing properly in the warm home. His English got better quickly, so he didn't need his translator as much. Most importantly, he was learning to trust again, but not everything was easy. Taiho still had bad dreams about his planet being destroyed. He would wake up hissing and clicking in fear, his claws out to defend himself. During these times, Dong Yun would sit with him, not touching but just being there, until the fear went away. There were also cultural differences. Draconians marked their territory with scent, a habit Taiho had to unlearn in shared spaces. He still hid food sometimes, a survival habit from his time on the streets. And sometimes he got too aggressive when he felt threatened at school. One evening, Dong Yun came home to find Taiho sitting at the kitchen table, his head crest flat against his head in shame. What's wrong? Dong Yun asked, putting down his tool bag. Taiho pushed a data pad across the table. It had a message from his teacher. Taiho had gotten into a fight with another student, who had called him a war refugee and said his parents had been enemies. I got angry. Taiho admitted, not looking at Dong Yun. I didn't hurt him badly, but I scared him. I'm sorry. Dong Yun sat down across from the young Draconian. Tell me what happened from the start. As Taiho told the story, Dong Yun listened without interrupting. The human's face stayed calm, but his hands tightened when Taiho described the other student's mean words. Am I in trouble? Taiho asked when he finished. Will they send me back to the refugee area? No, Dong Yun said firmly. You're not going anywhere. What you did wasn't right, but I understand why you did it. He reached out slowly, giving Taiho time to move away if he wanted. and put his hand on the young Draconian's shoulder. "We'll go together tomorrow to talk with your teacher. You'll say sorry for fighting, but not for defending your parents' honor." Taiho looked up, surprised. "You're not mad?" "I'm worried, not mad," Dong Yun explained. "Fighting isn't the answer, but neither is letting others disrespect your family. We need to find a balance." The next day, they went to see Taiho's teacher, Ms. Minji. She was a kind human woman who had worked with many refugee children. "Taiho has something to say," Dong Yun said after they sat down in her classroom. Taiho stood up straight, his head crest slightly raised in respect. "I'm sorry for scaring Junho. I shouldn't have shown my claws or hissed at him." "That was wrong," Ms. Minji nodded. "Thank you for apologizing. But I sense there's more you want to say." "I'm not sorry for defending my parents," Taiho continued. "They were good people. They were scholars, not enemies. They died trying to save others when our ship was attacked." Ms. Minji's expression softened. "I understand. Junho has apologized too. He didn't know about your parents, but that's no excuse for what he said." After the meeting, as they walked home, Dong Yun put his hand on Taiho's shoulder. "I'm proud of you. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, but also to stand up for what's right." Taiho's head crest rose high, showing his happiness at the praise. That weekend, Dong Yun took Taiho to the station's central dome, where plants from many worlds grew under a clear ceiling that showed the stars. It was Taiho's favorite place on the station. As they sat on a bench, watching the stars, Dong Yun said, "I've been thinking. You've been with me for 3 months now. How do you feel about staying longer?" Taiho looked at him, his vertical pupils wide. "How much longer?" "Permanently," Dong Yun said. "The station has approved my request to adopt you, if that's what you want. You would legally be my son." Taiho was quiet for a long time. In Draconian culture, adoption was a sacred bond, as strong as blood ties. "You want me to be your son? Forever?" "Yes," Dong Yun said simply. "You're already family to me, Taiho. This would just make it official." "What about Doyen?" Taiho asked quietly. "Your real son?" Dong Yun's eyes grew sad, but his voice stayed steady. "Doyen will always be my son. Nothing can change that. But having you in my life doesn't dishonor his memory. I think he would be happy to know I found you." Taiho thought about this. Then he did something he had never done before. He moved closer to Dong Yun and leaned against his side. A Draconian gesture of family trust. "I would like to be your son," he said softly. Dong Yun put his arm around the young Draconian, careful of his growing wings. Then it settled. The adoption ceremony was small but meaningful. The station administrator, a few of Dong Yun's friends from work, and Ms. Minji gathered in their home. Even Junho came, bringing a handmade card to apologize again. Taiho wore his best clothes, and his scales gleamed with special oil that Draconians used for important ceremonies. Dong Yun wore a formal suit. The administrator read the official documents and then asked, "Do you, Dong Yun, accept Taiho as your legal son, with all rights and responsibilities that entails?" "I do," Dong Yun said firmly. "And do you, Taiho, accept Dong Yun as your legal father, with all rights and responsibilities that entails?" Taiho's voice was clear and strong. "I do." "Then by the authority of Orbital Station 9, I declare you father and son." Everyone clapped, and Ms. Minji wiped away a tear. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Taiho sat in his room, looking at the data crystal with his parents' picture. He had placed it in a special frame that Dong Yun had helped him make. "I have a new father now," he told the image softly. "But I will never forget you." From the doorway, Dong Yun watched silently, his heart full. They had both lost so much, but somehow, against all odds, they had found each other. Different species, from different worlds, now a family. A year passed since Taiho became Dong Yun's son. The young Draconian was now 7 years old and growing fast. His wings had developed enough that he could glide short distances, though true flight was still years away. His blue scales shone with health, and his confidence grew every day. Taiho's toy-making had become more than just a hobby. With Dong Yun's help, he had set up a small workshop in his room. There, he created toys that were becoming famous throughout the station. He made mechanical animals that moved like real ones, tiny spaceships that lit up and made sounds, and action figures with moving parts. Your toys are amazing, Dong Yun said one evening as he watched Taiho finish a small robot that could walk and wave its arms. Have you ever thought about selling them again? Not because you have to, but because others would enjoy them. Taiho looked up from his work. Do you think people would buy them? I know they would, Dong Yun said. My friend Sunwoo owns a shop in the main market. He said he'd be happy to sell your toys there. The next day, they took 10 of Taiho's best creations to Sunwoo's shop. The shop owner, a friendly human with a round face and quick smile, examined each toy carefully. These are wonderful, Sunwoo said. I can sell these for 20 credits each, maybe more. We'll split the profits, 15 credits to you, 5 to the shop. Deal. Taiho's head crest rose high with pride. Deal. Within a week, all 10 toys had sold. Customers were asking for more. Taiho could hardly believe it. People wanted his creations not out of pity, but because they truly valued them. With his earnings, Taiho bought better materials and tools. He also insisted on putting some credits into the household account, though Dong Yun tried to tell him it wasn't necessary. We are family, Taiho said firmly. In Draconian culture, all family members contribute to the nest. Dong Yun smiled at the word nest. Taiho still used Draconian terms sometimes, especially when he was emotional. All right, but most of it goes into your savings account for the future. As Taiho's business grew, so did his interest in engineering. His teachers noticed his talent and gave him extra projects. By the time he was 8, he was taking advanced classes with students much older than him. One day, Taiho came home from school very excited. Father, I've been chosen for the Junior Engineers program. Dong Yun looked up from the station system. He was repairing at their kitchen table. That's wonderful. Tell me about it. Only 10 students from the whole station get picked, Taiho explained, his words coming fast. We'll work with real engineers on station projects, and if we do well, we can apply for the engineering academy when we're older. Dong Yun put down his tools and gave Taiho his full attention. I'm so proud of you. This is a great opportunity. Taiho's excitement dimmed a little, but it means I'll have less time for making toys. Sometimes we have to make choices. Dong Yun said gently. What do you want more right now, to make toys or to learn engineering? Taiho thought about this. I want to learn engineering, but I don't want to disappoint Sunwoo and the customers. Why not do both, but make fewer toys? Quality over quantity, Dong Yun suggested. Sunwoo will understand, and special toys that are harder to get might be even more valued. This turned out to be true. When Taiho cut back to making just 2 or 3 toys a month, customers began to wait in line at Sunwoo's shop on delivery days. The toys became collector's items, and the prices went up. Meanwhile, Taiho thrived in the Junior Engineers program. He worked on real station problems, like improving the water recycling system and making the artificial gravity more stable. His unique Draconian perspective often led to creative solutions that others hadn't considered. Draconians see patterns differently than humans, he explained to Dong Yun one night. We can process multiple visual inputs at once. That's why I noticed the power fluctuation pattern that was causing the gravity issues. Dong Yun listened with interest. Over the years, he had learned much about Draconian culture and biology from Taiho, just as Taiho had learned about humans from him. Your parents would be so proud of how you're using your gifts, Dong Yun said. Taiho's expression grew serious. Do you think they would mind that I have a human father now? Dong Yun considered this carefully. From what you've told me about them, they were scholars who valued knowledge and understanding between species. I think they would be happy that you found a family who loves you, no matter what species. Taiho nodded, his head crest rising and falling in the pattern that showed he was processing deep emotions. I had a dream about them last night. They were showing me how to fix something, like they used to, but you were there too, helping. That sounds like a good dream, Dong Yun said softly. It was. Taiho agreed. It felt right, all of us together, as Taiho's 9th birthday approached. Dong Yun planned a special surprise. He had been saving for months and working extra shifts to afford it. The morning of Taiho's birthday, Dong Yun presented him with a small box. Happy birthday, son, Taiho opened it carefully. Inside was an official document and a small model of a ship. "What is this?" he asked, confused. "Two things," Dong Yun explained. "First, the document is your official citizenship papers. You're now a full citizen of the Earth Alliance, not just a refugee. You have all the same rights as anyone born in Alliance space." Taeho's eyes widened. Citizenship was rare for refugees, especially non-humans. "How did you get this?" "I had help from your teachers and the station administrator. Your work in the Junior Engineers program impressed a lot of people." Dong Yun smiled. "The second part is our vacation. That ship is taking us to Earth next month. I thought you might want to see the planet your parents were traveling to." Taiho was speechless. He had never left the station since arriving as a refugee. The thought of seeing Earth, the homeworld of humans, and a place his parents had dreamed of visiting, was overwhelming. "We're going to Earth?" he finally managed to say. Together, Dong Yun confirmed. "For 2 weeks. We'll see the oceans, the mountains, and visit the biggest engineering school on the planet. Who knows, maybe you'll study there someday." Taiho carefully put down the model ship and the citizenship papers. Then he did something rare. He hugged Dong Yun tightly, his small arms wrapping around the human's waist. "Thank you, Father," he said, his voice muffled against Dong Yun's shirt. Dong Yun hugged him back, careful of his wings. "You're welcome, son." That night, as Taiho slept surrounded by his tools and half-finished projects, Dong Yun stood in the doorway watching him. The small, scared Draconian selling toys in the rain seemed like a distant memory now. In his place was a confident young engineer with a bright future. Dong Yun thought about how much they had both changed. He had been broken by loss, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Taiho had given him purpose again, a reason to look forward to each day. Different species, from different worlds, they had found in each other what they both needed most: a family. 5 years had passed since Taiho became Dong Yun's son. Now 12 years old, Taiho had grown into a remarkable young Draconian. His wings were almost fully developed, allowing him to fly short distances in the station's open areas. His engineering skills had advanced far beyond his years, and his toys were now collector's items across several star systems. Their trip to Earth had been life-changing for both of them. Taiho had been amazed by the planet's natural wonders: oceans, forests, and open skies. Dong Yun had rediscovered his homeworld through Taiho's eyes, seeing beauty he had long taken for granted. During their visit to Earth's Engineering Academy, Taiho had impressed the professors so much that they offered him a future place. When he turned 16, it was a dream come true, one that Taiho worked toward every day. But today was special for another reason. Dong Yun and Taiho were heading to the refugee sector of Orbital Station 9, the same place where they had first met 6 years ago. "Are you nervous?" Dong Yun asked as they walked through the familiar corridors. Taiho's head crest rippled slightly, showing mild anxiety. "A little. It's strange to go back. We don't have to do this if you're not ready," Dong Yun reminded him. "No, I want to," Taiho said firmly. "It's important." They reached the refugee sector, which looked much the same as it had years ago. Makeshift shelters lined the walls, and tired-looking beings from many worlds moved about their daily business. The war had ended, but new conflicts had created new refugees. Taiho carried a large box, carefully wrapped. Inside were 50 of his finest toys, each one made with special care over the past 6 months. This was why they had come to give these toys to refugee children who had nothing. They set up at a small table near where Taiho had once sold his toys to survive. Word spread quickly, and soon children of various species began to gather round, their eyes wide with curiosity and hope. "These are for you," Taiho told them, opening the box. "One for each of you. No cost." A small Centaurian girl, her legs thin from poor nutrition, approached cautiously. "Really free? No credits." "Really free," Taiho confirmed. "Choose anyone you like." The girl selected a toy spaceship that lit up and made soft engine sounds when touched. Her face brightened with joy as the toy came to life in her hands. One by one, the children came forward. A Vexillian boy with translucent skin chose a toy soldier. Twin Martian girls picked matching dolls with changeable outfits. A shy Terran human selected a robot dog that could walk and bark. As the children dispersed with their treasures, Taiho noticed a small figure hanging back in the shadows. It was a young Draconian, perhaps 6 years old, the same age Taiho had been when Dong Yun found him. The child's scales were dull gray, and his wings were underdeveloped. Clear signs of malnutrition and stress. Taiho approached him slowly, careful not to seem threatening. "Hello, what's your name?" "Minho," the young Draconian replied softly, his translator converting his clicks and growls to human speech. "I'm Taiho. Would you like a toy?" "Minho." The child nodded but didn't move closer. Taiho returned to the box and selected a special toy one he had made, just in case they met another Draconian child. It was a detailed model of a traditional Draconian home, with tiny figures of a family inside. He brought it to Minho. "This one is special. It's from our home world." Minho's eyes widened as he took the toy. "I don't remember our world. I was too little when it was destroyed." "Me too," Taiho admitted. "But my parents told me stories, and I made this from their descriptions." The young Draconian examined the toy carefully. "It's beautiful. Did you make it yourself?" "I did," Taiho said. "I used to make toys to sell when I lived here." Minho looked up in surprise. "You lived here? But you look healthy." Taiho glanced at Dong Yun, who was watching from a distance, giving them space. "Someone helped me. A human who became my father." "A human?" Minho's head crest flattened with confusion. "How can a human be a Draconian's father?" "Family isn't just about species," Taiho explained. "It's about who cares for you, who teaches you, who makes sure you're safe." He paused. "Are you here alone, Minho?" The young Draconian's crest flattened completely against his head. "My parents died in the last attack on the refugee ships. My aunt brought me here, but she's very sick now." Taiho felt a deep connection to this child who had suffered so much, just as he once had. "Would you like to meet my father?" Minho nodded cautiously. Taiho waved Dong Yun over. The human approached slowly, understanding the delicate situation. "Father, this is Minho. He's here with his aunt, who is sick." Dong Yun crouched down to be at eye level with the young Draconian. "Hello, Minho. I'm Dong Yun. That's a beautiful toy you have there." "Taiho made it," Minho said, his voice gaining a little strength. "He said it's a Draconian home." "It is," Dong Yun confirmed. "Taiho has taught me a lot about Draconian culture. Would you like to tell me about your aunt? Maybe we can help her," as Minho spoke about his aunt's illness. Taiho and Dong Yun exchanged glances. They hadn't planned this, but they both knew what needed to happen. Later that day, they visited the medical center where Minho's aunt was being treated. Her condition was serious, but treatable with proper care she couldn't get in the refugee sector. "We have room in our home," Dong Yun told her. "You and Minho could stay with us while you recover." Taiho could help Minho adjust. It's good for him to be around another Draconian. The aunt, Suman, was hesitant at first. "Why would you help strangers?" "Because someone once helped me," Dong Yun said simply. "And now it's our turn to help others." 2 weeks later, their home had new residents. Suman was slowly recovering, and Minho was beginning to show signs of improvement too. His scales were regaining some color, and he followed Taiho everywhere, fascinated by his toys and engineering projects. One evening, as Dong Yun prepared dinner for their expanded family, he found Taiho and Minho in the living room. Taiho was showing the younger Draconian how to use tools to make a simple toy. "See? You have to be patient," Taiho was saying. "Good things take time." Dong Yun watched silently, his heart full. 6 years ago, he had found a scared, hungry child selling toys to survive. Now that child was a confident young engineer, passing on his knowledge to another who needed help. The circle was complete. What had once been broken, both Dong Yun's heart and Taiho's trust in the world, had been remade into something stronger and more beautiful. Their family had grown in ways neither could have imagined. Different species from different worlds. They had created something rare and precious, a home where everyone belonged, regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. As Minho's small clawed hands carefully shaped his first toy under Taiho's guidance, Dong Yun knew that this was humanity at its best, not conquering the stars, but reaching across the void to offer warmth, safety, and love to those who needed it most. The abandoned dragon baby who once sold toys to survive had found not just a home, but a purpose. And in that purpose, the true meaning of being human and draconian was revealed.